Thanks for reading thestartupfoundry.com. You're watching the first 6 months of Reddit. Entrepreneurship is a bipolar existence. If you have a great service that you'd like to advertise on thestartupfoundry.com to hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs and founders, get in touch with me at paul@thestartupfoundry.com. Enjoy the show. Hi, I'm Paul Hans from The Startup Foundry. Today we have Alexis Ohanian, the co-founder of Reddit, on the show. And Alexis, tell us about the early days of Reddit.
All right. Wow, the early days of Reddit. That was Steve Huffman and I in a little apartment in Medford, Massachusetts. It was actually one of the nicest apartments we ever rented during the period of Reddit because it was the top floor of a sort of divided old building out in the middle of nowhere in Medford, which is a little bit of a walk from the Red Line. But it was a great place to work because it was full of old people, the neighborhood, not the apartment. And so we didn't have too many people to distract us. And we spent those 3 months just slaving over this thing that would eventually become Reddit. And actually, I published screenshots of Reddit during those early 3 months because that was actually the period in which the Reddit interface changed the most because we really didn't have a clue what we were doing, and we started with a few links on a front page. And I still remember debating with Steve about whether or not to even have voting, and then if to have voting on the links, how to do it. For a while, there was a big campaign to just remove. There was a campaign to make it as simple as possible, and so it was: do we make it not even have voting? What if it's just based on clicks? Well, then how do you correct if someone has tricked you with a good headline but not a very good story? Well, then you need a downvote, and if you just had a site with downvotes, that would be kind of depressing. But you could just have a site where people are trying to punish content they don't like, but they wouldn't really have a feel-good kind of mechanism to vote up stuff they did like. And then we started looking it up and down, but then we thought maybe we could just replace the down with a non-vote of the up, which is sort of like the model that was what Dig, we later learned, was doing. But yeah, we got the site launched in about a month. We launched June 20-something. I don't know. Again, that's somewhere. I recorded that somewhere on the internet.
In what year was that?
2005. I think that was important. And we were in the first round of Y Combinator startups, which was something we didn't expect at all, especially considering that we had gotten rejected based on our original idea. And then Paul called me back on the cell as Steve and I were on the train back to Virginia, which is where we were going to school, and said, listen, as long as you get rid of that other idea and come up with something new, you can be in Y Combinator. And even though we'd been thinking about it for over a year, and I still think our idea is something that I wish would come to fruition, it was absolutely the right choice to make for all kinds of reasons. But we came back to Boston, met with Paul for about an hour, brainstormed, and what we came up with was something that Paul crystallized really well in this notion of a front page of the web. And that's how Reddit got started.
Okay, so for those that aren't familiar, you guys hopped on a train, went out to California, met with these guys, the Y Combinator guys, Paul Graham and the team. And
yes, although it was a train to Boston.
Okay.
That would have been a torturous train ride to California from Virginia.
Yeah, well, that's all right. Yeah, that makes a little more sense. I read your story and I thought it was in California. I'm like, man, those guys just wasted like a week of their life.
There have to be better means of transportation across the country. Yeah, we'd originally wanted to take a couple of oxen and a wagon, but we just had to go for the train because we were
Oregon Trail, right? So okay, so you take a train up there. And what was your original idea?
Oh, this is good. All right, so this is something that I wish still happened. We wanted to let you order food from your mobile phone to basically be able to basically carry out food from your mobile. So instead of waiting online at the same Starbucks that you go to every other day, you would place the order, let's say when you're 5 or 6 blocks away, so that when you get there, it's already been made, and it's just chilling on the counter for you, and you say, hey, what's up? I'm Alexis. And the barista's like, here you go, Alexis, goodbye. And you get the hell out of there. And maybe I'm not that, well, I don't get that irritated when I wait in line, but I live in New York now, and I spend a lot of time in New York. I know how irritated New Yorkers get when they have to wait in line or online, which is just weird. Yes, when they wait online, it's a frustrating process, especially when you know exactly what you're going to get. And it really should at this point be a kind of cashless transaction. If I'm only spending like $5, $6, why can't we just take care of all that without having me take out my wallet? But we had thought about this for about a year, and Steve had first come up with it because he didn't like pulling into the gas station Sheetz, which I think is primarily a Southern brand, down in Virginia, and he would pump his car, and he didn't like waiting to have to go into the sort of convenience store part of it and place his order for a sub, because you see, Sheetz was clever. They actually had touchscreens so that you could place your orders right there, not have to interact with a human, and then someone in back actually prepares it and makes it for you. His thinking was just, why don't we just cut out the touchscreen and let me do this order for my phone? However, 2005 was a tough time for mobile because, our Blackberries were around, and I think there was some device from Palm called a Trio or something.
Right.
But there weren't really smartphones, and we didn't have Android phones. We didn't have app stores. We certainly didn't have the iPhone. And we were imagining a bunch of people on razors, basically. God, those were horrible phones, but so popular. Uh, Placing these orders somehow through SMS or some clever hacks that we're doing. And it basically meant interfacing with phone companies like AT&T and T and having to go to them and begging them to install our software or making it available for download. And then also going to restaurants and speaking with restaurateurs who are not really known as like bleeding edge folks, and not necessarily willing to try new stuff. And frankly, to this day, are still taking plenty of their online orders. This is just online orders via fax. So Paul and the partners at Y Combinator got really nervous, but Jessica in particular really liked us, or I should say, really liked Steve, and I think they were talking about it maybe over breakfast the next morning, and had this feeling where they thought, all right, let's take a chance and invite these two back. Just as long as they come up with a better idea.
And as long as they're not taking trains to California.
I mean, well, it could be a really beautiful ride. In fact, I'm sure it is a really beautiful ride, but yeah, not that efficient.
So what is it that they saw in you guys that said, hey, like their ideas, like it's not the right time for their idea, but we want to invite them back? You said they like you, but like what does that mean?
Well, I don't know. You would think it would take a lot to convince them to invest in a couple of founders when their idea is so bad. Well, okay. So by Jessica's own admission, part of it was actually just that. I think this has been said publicly. Hope it has. That she just thought Steve was kind of adorable, and in this, how about this for someone for someone as brilliant and who has done so much great stuff in the way of picking startups. One of the very first ones, Reddit, was let into Y Combinator just because Steve Hoffman is adorable. There you have it. Um, I, I think I think what that speaks toward though is just the people, and that's why you can't go two sentences into an interview with Paul without him saying how important it is that picking founders, or how important it is rather to pick good founders, and that ideas really aren't that important. And that is kind of a startup cliche, actually. I mean, everyone talks about how great people are, and how much of a difference they make, and how you invest in them, not ideas. So I guess it was something that they saw in us, and that was even before I showed them any of the mascots that I could draw. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.
I see. So, okay, so let's get back onto Reddit.
Mhm.
So the first 6 months just had to be tough. I mean, to do a user-generated site, you need just a ton of users. So
Mhm.
how were you able to really get some traction and get going on that?
Well, well, we had some really good advice from Paul, and he sort of first planted the seed of saying, "Well, all right, you've reached out to your friend network. It's not that big, and then only a few of them are actually willing to help out and seed the site with submissions." This was before comments, mind you, and he suggested just faking accounts, and it was a great idea. And so Steve built a really simple way for us to log in, come up with a username, and then just put in our submission. And this worked for we needed this for at least the first few weeks, and then eventually we had this tipping point. Sorry, Malcolm Gladwell, I owe you $1. We had this tipping point where all right, it kind of spilled over to some number of like early adopter geeks who had started coming to the site and actually were using it, and Steve and I no longer needed to. And it also helped that we were the first Y Combinator company to launch. And so there were lots of people who were just, fans of Paul Graham who wanted to see what his company was going to be producing in the way of investing, or rather, what his company was going to be investing in. And yeah, we got a lot of attention just from Paul Graham shout outs and the like. but we didn't actually attract any mainstream press for months. And this was the world before Twitter. So it was part of my job. I mean, part of being a non-technical founder includes being willing to do stuff that no one else will do, but also really have a high tolerance for grunt work, for digital grunt work, if that makes sense. And so anytime anyone would write anything about Reddit, they were going to get a comment from the co-founder. We didn't, I couldn't, I've never been able to in any serious way call myself a CEO or use any of those C-level titles, but they would get a reply from a co-founder. And that's really kind of cool, even if it's just a company of two in an apartment in Medford, Massachusetts. And, and so that's how we really just hustled to try and get any kind of traffic that we could. And the big validation for us was a few weeks in when the site just worked, and neither Steve nor I needed to do any submitting or do any voting, and we could just kind of hang out like a total lurker. And yeah, that was a great sign that maybe we weren't wasting our time.
Hmm.
But I'll tell you, in those first 6 months, we we saw so many. We had so many of these weird milestones, and these weren't very large milestones in the grand scheme of things, but for us psychologically, it was huge. And so whether it was having that day when we didn't need to use Reddit, or whether it was securing angel funding, which meant we could basically live our college lifestyles for at least another year. And then we had really productive meeting. Or well, okay, so we had in September, October, somewhere in the fall, maybe November, let's say October, we had a couple of really interesting meetings with two very large search companies. And one of them was not at all interested in us. I mean, it's been long enough, right? So we had a meeting with Yahoo, and they couldn't care less about us. They were very interested in how much traffic we had, and we were like, well, we're only 4 months old, so it's a ridiculously small number. And we had another meeting with another large search company called Google. Uh, yeah, so much for the anonymity, right? So we had another meeting with Google, and that went really, really well. And that was actually where we first met Chris Sacca, who at that time was principal for Google. And we came away from that meeting feeling so incredibly good because, I mean, long story short, some really, really smart people at Google were interested in what we were doing. And it was so incredibly validating to know that, all right, Steve and I graduated from college in May of this same year. And now all of a sudden, like, we're going out to Google and getting a tour of the Googleplex, and people are telling us they're really interested in the stuff we've been working on. And, you think there are cool ways to apply this to stuff here, sort of thing. And those were the little boosts of energy that just, they were just total mind jobs, but incredibly vital to sort of keeping us alive keeping us alive sort of psychologically, because it is such a bipolar existence. And it's, some mornings you feel like you're taking over the world, and others you just, you dread getting out of bed. But either way, you have to.
Yeah. So getting those quick and easy wins for your startup was just huge in like keeping you moving forward.
Yeah. And I think you've got to find those and celebrate those in those early 6 months. Especially, it's been so different doing Hipmunk now, because it's such a different experience the second time around, because you've learned so much, and there's so many things I know I look back on going, oh God, that was such a stupid way to do that. And I know Steve says the same thing from a programming point of view, that especially when you're doing it your first time around, there are so many opportunities to just quit. And not that I would think I was ever close to quitting at Reddit. No, I'm sure I wasn't. No, I know I wasn't close to quitting at Reddit, but there were so many little moments when you're just wondering whether or not this is the right thing to be doing, and there's so much pressure, there's so much psychological, just, it can be a really debilitating experience at times. And so you really got to find those victories and really celebrate them. I mean, that doesn't mean like strippers and Coke celebrate them, but this means,
Winning.
everyone in the company taking pride in this.
Yeah, so no Charlie Sheen partying, just
Mhm.
just startup
That's
partying.
why I always tell founders, don't make Charlie Sheen a co-founder. General rule, and I stand by it.
Yeah, great advice. Hi, I'm Paul Hans from the Startup Foundry. Today we have Alexis Ohanian, the co-founder of Reddit, on the show. And Alexis, tell us about the early days of Reddit.